Thanks for joining us today. I'm Helen Jung. I'm the opinion editor for the Oregonian. And Laura Gunderson, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi there, my name is Laura Gunderson. I'm the newspaper's Director of Public Interest and Accountability, which basically means I oversee our newsroom and also serve on the editorial board.
Yes.
Great.
Of course, years ago, you used to do a beat, you were the beat reporter for the Washington County Commissioners.
I was. You
Yes.
helped me cut my teeth in reporting. Thank you for all the help along the way, Dick.
Welcome.
And I see Therese Bottomley is about to join us. So as soon as she gets on, she can introduce herself.
Hi, Therese Bottomley, editor of the Oregonian.
Great.
Nice to meet you.
Hi.
So we are with the Democratic candidates for Senate District 14. And if we can start off, Kate, if you wouldn't mind starting us off and telling us who you are and why you're running for this position.
Thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here. Really simply put, I'm running. One of the biggest things that spurred me to run was when Trump won in 2016. And of course, I've been increasingly alarmed at how he has handled leadership and how poorly it's gone. But I just want to tell you just a bit about myself. So I grew up in Indiana. I was raised by a single mom after my dad died when I was 10. And one of the foundational things it's important that I tell people, important to know about me, is that I was actually gay in the 80s in Indiana. And that really shaped me in a lot of ways. I really know what it's like to feel powerless and unseen. And it's actually one of the reasons that spurred me to go to law school, as I never wanted to feel powerless or have anybody else feel powerless again. I went to law school. I met my wife. We've been together for 27 years. And I moved to Oregon in 1995, and I joined the district attorney's office, where I concentrated prosecuting child abuse cases and domestic violence cases. After I left the DA's office, after about 12 or 13 years, I got what I consider to be one of my battle scars, my life's battle scars, which is I was diagnosed with stage 3 breast cancer, and my kids were really, still really young. But it gave me this up close and personal look at our healthcare system in a way that was illuminating and alarming. And I really realized that, no one should be fighting to pay the bills while they're fighting for their lives. And so healthcare, of course, even now in this pandemic, is even more important for us to really have a conversation around universal healthcare. While I was battling breast cancer, I actually got a call from the governor's office who asked me to sit on the Psychiatric Security Review Board, which I did for 8 years. I chaired it for 5. And that's the board that has jurisdiction over people in the state under guilty except for insanity designation. It gave me a really good understanding, of course, about the mental health system, as well as sort of give me a better understanding about the state of our government. After I rolled off that board after 8 years, I was really interested in the intersection of mental health and homelessness. And so I joined the Transition Projects, which I currently chair the board. And we're, working in the space of homelessness is something that is incredibly important to me. But at my heart, I'm a teacher. I've taught at Portland Community College, first teaching there in 1998 in the Criminal Justice Department. I teach there to this day. And so the question of why I'm doing this is, I really consider myself to be an accidental politician. This wasn't the path that I had seen myself going down. But after 2016 happened, and with Trump in the White House and sort of, rolling back everything that we held dear, I really knew that our state legislatures were the place that we really needed to, that needed to be as strong as we could have them in order to make sure that we are holding on to our rights. I also, at that time, though, thought we were good because I'm a Democrat. I'm a very deep-seated Democrat, and I knew we had a Democratic governor and a Democratic House and a Democratic Senate. And when 2019 happened and the Republicans walked out the first time, I knew we were more broken than I thought. So when this opportunity came to me and this seat came open, I really realized that, I'm at my core, I'm a doer. I want to get things done. I want to be the person who's able to do that. And I did my due diligence and I talked to a bunch of people. And quite frankly, I talked to a lot of electeds, and one of them said to me, "Don't think too much about it or you won't do it." So I didn't think too much about it and stepped off and decided that. So that's one of the reasons that I think that it is really important. And quite frankly, in this pandemic, the stakes are higher than ever for us to make sure that we get people in Salem who are going to get and do the hard work and do what needs to get done.
Great, thank you very much. Dick, can you tell us a little bit about why you're running for this position?
Yeah, I'm running for a couple of reasons. Obviously, the opportunity presented itself last year in August, but I have a lot of experience as a local legislator for nearly 20 years now on the Washington County Board of Commissioners, and much of my career has been really at the intersection of public policy, local government, and actually state government as well, and law practice. And I have very much enjoyed my time on the Washington County Board of Commissioners. Been very successful on a number of fronts, including worked on the 10-year plan to end homelessness. Have been a lead on the county board with respect to working with nonprofit home builders to build a number of projects using land that the county dedicated or donated as part of a very complicated financing plan for these nonprofit builders in 3 or 4 sites in the county. But in addition to my experience, I also thought that it's very important to have someone who really knows and understands this community. This community is overwhelmingly a Washington County district. It serves the southern half of Beaverton, much of Aloha, Garden Home, Raleigh Hills, a couple of precincts in Southwest Portland and on the Multnomah County side. But I think it's fundamentally a place that I know and understand extremely well. About 70% of my county commission district is in the state senate district. I have worked, canvassed, been to countless open houses and workshops, worked with the community in Aloha and Beaverton on projects that are important to the area. And I saw this as an opportunity to bring experience and a deep knowledge of this district to the state legislature. And in my legal career, I have been both I've worked on individual cases, and I've also done some impact litigation work in the past, notably with the Sierra Club Legal Defense Fund years ago. And there's real value in impact litigation, just as there is at the state legislature. That's an opportunity to kind of get sort of past the on the ground, case-by-case situations and dig into some of the more fundamental policy issues and directions that the state legislature necessarily sets for local government.
Great, thank you very much. Let's see, and Dick, if you wouldn't mind going first on answering this question. It's unknown just how much the pandemic and stay-home order will cost the state in tax revenue, or how long and deeply the economic impacts will cut. Can you give a couple ideas of what you think the legislature should do next to help individuals and businesses get through this economic crisis?
Well, I think there's actually 2 parts to this. I think that certainly there's some immediate support that the state can provide, though fundamentally, in terms of the kind of significant dollars that we're really talking about, we're really going to have to work very closely with the federal government. They have the ability to spend and not be concerned about a balanced budget. They can literally, print their own money, as it were. So I certainly share Kate's deep concern about this administration. We need a new administration. We need to work very closely with the federal government to continue to bring dollars in to support small businesses, to support frontline workers. That includes, by the way, just recently there was a great story in the Oregonian about migrant workers coming into Washington County, and this is an important ag county as well as a high-tech place. And the working conditions in the migrant camps really lend themselves to them turning into real major COVID hotspots. So we need state funding there as well. I think more fundamentally beyond the immediate crisis is the issue of how we work through the recovery process and the sort of the immediate post-COVID short-term problems. And I think and one of the reasons why I'm running for the state legislature is that fundamentally the state government has been starved of revenues for way too long, and we need to find some additional revenue sources. And it's one reason why I'd like to be on the revenue committee. That's going to be a big order, but it has to start. Of course, these discussions have been going on for some time. I certainly recognize Senator Mark Hass's work with the school funding revenue enhancement that he came up with and engineered through the legislature. So these are long-term pieces, but I would like to see us really make some meaningful difference in terms of income enhancements at the state level, and whether I'll be able to see within a near-term success there. It needs voices and it needs champions, and I would be very interested in doing that. I have seen firsthand lots of very good evidence-based health and human service programs that just die in Ways and Means Committee because there just isn't the funding there. So it's extremely frustrating for people to serve on one of these health and human services committees, and whether in the state Senate or in the House, and then see all their work really just disappear when Ways and Means say, sorry, there isn't the money there for it.
Great, thank you. Kate, would you like me to repeat the question?
Yeah, that'd be great.
Sure. It's unknown how much the pandemic and stay-home order are going to cost the state in terms of tax revenue. And it's also unclear how long or deeply the economic impacts will cut. I'm wondering if you have a couple ideas of what you think the legislature should do next to help individuals and businesses get through this.
Great, thank you. You know, as we all know, state budgets they're complex and they're fluid, and of course they depend on anticipated revenue, which we're going to get another update in May. But they're clearly going to be influenced by this pandemic, both in revenue and expenditures. And we have a big unknown. You know, we don't know where the end of this is, and we also don't know what the federal dollars are going to look like. But I think there are things that we just have to do. One is we've got to maximize federal assistance. So we need to work with the feds, we need to work with our partners in there, and we need to make sure that Oregon gets as many federal dollars as possible. That also means making sure that we are funding matching dollar programs like the Oregon Health Plan. So we need to understand what were federal matching programs, and we need to make sure that we're maximizing those. We also need to protect the most vulnerable by making sure that the needed services are funded. And that in turn gets dollars circulated back into the local economy. When you have SNAP or when you have all of those services to make sure that our most vulnerable have what they need, it gets in turn back into the economy. I think the third thing that we really should be doing is we got to make sure that we do not delay the corporate activity tax. I know there's been certainly some pushback on the governor around this, but cutting this won't help the businesses that are really most in need, or the businesses that are having a most difficult time. And some businesses are showing an increase. And those businesses, we need to think of more meaningful ways to understand how we fill those gaps, especially with small business. You know, we've got to get our small businesses running again. We've got to loosen up. We need to have our own robust system of making sure that we can get funding to them, but we also have to make sure that we loosen up capital for those small businesses. And then I think really the last thing we're going to need to do is tap into some reserves. You know, the Democrats have done a good job in their leadership positions of making sure that we do have a rainy day fund. And if there's ever a rainy day, it is going to be as we come out of this pandemic, because we know that the choices that we make now are going to have long-term effects. But I think the biggest thing that we need to concentrate on is that we need to make sure that we're leading with compassion, that we're getting our small businesses open, that they're getting people back to work, and that we're making sure our most vulnerable are safe and that our safety nets are in place.
So in terms of the small business idea, are there specific ways that you're thinking the state can be a better partner for small businesses?
Yeah, you know, I think that the state should be, we've got to figure out what the feds are doing. So the feds have got a big program coming, but there's huge gaps in that program. We've already seen it, right? We've already seen that big corporations are getting getting these big payouts when they shouldn't. And so one of the first things that we need to do is understand where those gaps are. And then we need to start filling those gaps. And one of the ways we can do that is give them loans that are either grants or loans that are forgivable. We need to loosen up dollars so small businesses can get themselves back on track. We need to make sure that we understand what's happening with these small businesses in terms of equity. I would love to see this idea that, especially even for people who are who have a mortgage, and small businesses will sometimes fit into this category of working with banks, of just giving a few months of mortgage and lobbing it onto the end of the mortgage, right? Like let's ease up on expenses that are going out the door while we're in this really terrible time of low revenue. It's going to open up again. We're going to be okay, but there's going to be really hard choices to be made in Salem. And I think it is really important that we lead with the compassion that I know that we can.
I think, sort of riffing off of those good ideas from Kate, I would say that I'd be a little bit wary about the state playing the role of deciding who the winners and losers are. I think what we can do is we could perhaps do on a larger scale of what Washington County has been doing recently in the city of Beaverton, the city of Hillsborough, and Portland as well. In Washington County, we recently launched a little short of $1.2 million loan and grant program, working with micro lenders who have a very deep knowledge of these smaller businesses and are nimble and feel comfortable enough being able to provide discrete loans because they know these clients extremely well, unlike the larger financial institutions. So we, at the county level, currently, we're working with CDFIs, community development financial institutions, to help us make the right decisions, take guidance from them as to who out there really can make best use of the funds. And unfortunately, there's at least at the local level, there are more needs than there are funds. But I think we could try to ramp this up, working off the experience of some of the large jurisdictions like Washington County, to try to do this at the state level as well. And then we probably have to go beyond the CDFIs and be looking at some of the more local based, community banks and financial institutions, credit unions, and so forth.
And Dick, let me ask you something, because Kate raised an interesting point about the corporate activity tax. Would you support delaying that in any way? Well,
yeah, I've been talking with the folks, for example, at the Beaverton Chamber, some of the other business folks. There's just enough there that makes me feel like maybe we need just a little bit of time to sort of think through some of this. I mean, it isn't a tax on profits; it's a tax on gross receipts, and so I think we should take a look at perhaps just pushing that off a little bit, or maybe extending or increasing the triggering point in which that tax takes effect. But I'm looking more fundamentally sort of beyond that. I think I'd like to see us do a couple of things on the tax side. One is to make our income tax much more progressive. Number two, to put caps on the kicker, on any kicker taxes that come, that they are really directed to our lower income, lower middle income Oregonians, and to really look at bringing an end to interest mortgage deductions on second and third homes. And that would be funding that could be directed towards issues regarding homelessness, rent assistance, and things related to housing.
And actually, this kind of melds into my next question, and which I think you would be first to respond on. You had mentioned about your interest in reforming revenue. Are those, and you just named a few examples, is that pretty much the core of what you would look to change, or are there other more structural revenue changes that you would seek?
Well, I think if we make the state income tax more progressive, deal with some pretty big changes in on a pretty important piece of the income tax deduction side. Those are pretty structural changes. What I hadn't mentioned is another piece that that could help make a dent in substance abuse and alcoholism and mental health issues, which obviously is always a problem in this state. We rank, in fact, we rank very high in those areas. And of course, the pressure on people is intense now in the COVID-19 times that we're in. But while we rank very high in those areas in terms of substance abuse and alcoholism, we rank dead last 50 out of all the states with respect to a beer and wine tax. And I think that's been on the agenda for the Association of Oregon Counties for some time. And I'd like to work with the Association of Oregon Counties and other partners to see if we can make some real difference there. Because we struggle to fund those kinds of peer counseling centers in our county, and I'm sure that's true elsewhere as well.
And just to clarify, when you say make the income tax more progressive, are you talking about adding another tier or kind of raising the bottom bracket, or what exactly? How exactly would you make?
I without going into a great deal of detail, I think we want to increase earned income on the lower side of the scale, and add some additional brackets, and because there's such a disparity in terms of both in Oregon and nationally, and we need to see folks who do well on the capital gain side, who do well on the salary side, and on the corporate income side to make a larger contribution to the pie.
Okay, great, thank you. Kate, so it's kind of a sprawling question. I'm not exactly sure how I worded it before, but basically in terms of looking at revenue reform, are there new taxes or changes in the structure that you would support if you're elected to the legislature?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that it's important to understand somebody's philosophy around taxing and tax policy. So, I believe that really good tax policy meets sort of the following criteria, right? It's progressive. Those with more income and wealth contribute a larger share of the resources to, of course, support the common good. Adequacy, we got to make sure that we raise enough revenue to fund the public structures that create opportunity for all Oregonians, and we need it to be equitable. We know that our tax structure is really based on income. That's the majority of how we are taxed and what we spend. We also know that a lot of the state's budget comes from the federal government as well. But what's happening in Oregon, and what has continued to happen, is that the marginal tax and the burden on individuals has been higher and higher as the marginal tax for corporations in Oregon have gone lesser and lesser. Even, we're still in the bottom, even if we move to middle of the pack in terms of taxing our corporate partners, we would be doing much better. I would also want to see us taking a good look at the income tax brackets that we have, perhaps adding more brackets, perhaps lowering the one we have and adding another one. But I think all of this, you've got to look at tax policy as a whole in terms of the absolute impacts on the individual person. We've got to stop relying on individual taxing to continue to make up these deficits, because that's what's really, really hurting the Oregonians is their individual income tax.
Perhaps the biggest difference between Oregon and many other states in terms of the business taxes that are collected is our lack of a state sales tax, because it's not capturing what businesses are paying to one another for products. Is that something you would support?
I would. I mean, I think that it is. We've got to start thinking differently and acting urgently. It's really one of the things that is so important for me in terms of how we look at legislating, and now, of course, more than ever. We've got to look at everything. We can't be in a state that we think that we can't talk about a sales tax. Before this pandemic, a lot of money left the state from people who would come and visit and leave with no sales tax. And so I really think it's now going to be more than ever, it's imperative that we start looking at that as a viable alternative to our revenue problems.
I would add to Kate's criteria, I'd add one other criteria when you look at taxes, which is a nexus. Certainly when I talked about the putting an end to the interest mortgage deductions for second and third homes, I would look for that additional money to go into housing, rent assistance, and things like that. Because I think having a nexus between the tax and what it's going to is a useful criteria as well. Another thing that we haven't talked about in terms of structure is our property tax structure in the state is just horrific. Measure 50 in particular, but actually the whole start of it back in the early 1990s, has created a system in which areas where there's been rapid increase in property values don't pay in proportion to other areas where the property values have not increased as much. And we have situations where people live in a neighborhood and they've got widely different property taxes depending on the time that they bought the place and other factors. If we're putting things on the table, if we could revisit the property tax, I think if we did this right, we could be in a place where local government would have a more reliable source of property tax funding and take some of the load off of the state, because so much of the funds that in the state budget go into education, which in former times before this property tax debacle began in the early 1990s, much of that education funding was really done at the local level, and there was less of a burden on the state. There's a tremendous load on the state with respect to having to, provide education funding, given the property tax structure that we created in the last 30 years.
Great, thank you. Let me open this up to the other members of the board, see what questions they might have.
Yeah, I've got a question on PERS. Analysts have warned that the legislature's decision to delay repayment of the pension system's $25 billion unfunded liability would put the fund at greater risk in the event of a recession. Well, stocks have plummeted and we are almost certainly in a recession now. What, if anything, do you think we should do to tackle this public finance crisis? And does that go to Kate first, Helen? Am I keeping track correctly? Or is it?
I can't remember.
Sorry.
Actually,
Well,
it might go to Dick first.
Okay. Dick, okay.
Yeah.
Commissioner
Well,
Schouten.
I think. Okay. Yeah. Well, I think at this point, I think that the state has taken on obligations with respect to PERS, and they need to be met. And there's no way around that. And we've talked about increased revenues. One of the reasons why we need increased revenues is to be able for the state to meet its obligations to state, local, et cetera, employees who are PERS workers. That's just very fundamental kind of being responsible, being prudent in the way that we handle our finances. We have those obligations that need to be paid for. They probably need to be paid for out of general funds, because I don't think either legally or ethically, and both, I think, it's not fair to ask employees to take further cuts in their PERS payments and what's been vested to them. As I said a moment ago, it's both a legal problem, can't be done, and it's also, I think, an ethical issue that's just not right. We all have an obligation collectively as taxpayers to meet the obligations for people who were hired under a employment arrangement of a salary and future retirement, i.e. PERS.
Let me just clarify on that, Dick, though. We do know, I think it's clear from legal decisions that perhaps there are problems with going backward in time with public employees. But in terms of pension reform moving forward, do you see room for changes there?
Well, I think the issues are I think the financial obligations are less at the category 2. And the subsequent, it's the tier 1 where the obligations, I think, are still the principal issue. We have a fairly these tier 3 programs are pretty are not robust. At this point, we're probably not able to do better than that, but they're really not much more than sort of glorified 401ks or 455 plans. And at the moment, we're probably not in a position to do better than that. But the fact is, if you want to keep good employees, you need to put together an employment package that's going to be able to bring you the kind of employees that are going to do a good job for you. I know that's an issue at Washington County. We want to make sure that we get our share of really capable employees, that we not lose them to other public jurisdictions or lose them to the private sector. So we have to put together a package that's going to, that's going to be able to attract good employees.
And Kate, would you like me to repeat the question, or?
No, I got it. Thanks. This is, I think that you kind of said it right. This is a problem that the legislature has kicked the can down the road for probably 20 to 30 years, right? I mean, it's an issue that politicians were willing to make a trade many, many years ago to pay workers less in the present for a much more robust retirement. And we now have an actuarial problem, and it's a math problem. And it's a problem that, I fundamentally believe that we can't sacrifice the workers for the work, meaning that we can't continue, as we know, to try to balance this on with the current workers. I will say that there's no magic solution to PERS. Obviously, it's been tried. I think all solutions need to be on the table. The state is going to have to pay down some of this debt. We're just going to have to. We may need to have to refinance this over the long term in terms of the debt. But I agree with Dick that it is really difficult to attract workers without having without the compensation packages being at least robust, and that either means paying them more in now for a less robust retirement package, or having a more robust retirement package and paying them less now. So I firmly believe and will say that the moral and legal promise, though, that we made to workers already with the contract that we've given them is something that we can't go back on. But people have been trying to solve this PERS thing for a long time. It's a problem that is not going away. It's a problem that continues to get worse. And quite frankly, we're going to need to have to put money towards it, and probably from the general funds that are going to have to pay down that debt.
Yeah.
I'm curious because you said that I'm curious because you said that all options should be on the table. What are some viable options that you've heard to address this?
Well, I mean, I think that going in and paying using some of the rainy day, if there's some, I know there's some legal issues that are involved in terms of what funds can go towards paying down the debt in PERS, but I certainly think that we need to look at whether that's using some of the rainy day fund money, whether there's any relief that we might be able to get from the federal government. I think that it has really been a difficult thing for local jurisdictions to have to continue to pay so much of their budget into PERS. And we need to figure out how can we unlock it so it's not so hard for them. I don't have the magic bullet. Like that's part of the problem. But I think that it is something that we've chosen. Jurisdictions legislatures have chosen not to address this problem and kick the can down the road. And that's why we're in the place that we're in now.
Helen, I have to jump off. Thank you, candidates.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Great. Let's see. I think this goes to Kate first. Would you support moving forward with a cap and trade program in the 2021 session? And if so, how would you help it to go to a vote and possibly pass?
So, I think the 2021 session has changed, obviously, since we started this with the pandemic and everything. However, climate change is our next existential threat. Like it is a threat to the planet. we are only going to continue to see these things happening unless we address climate change. So I would absolutely want to be addressing this in the 2021 session. I think it is incredibly important. However, within our own legislature and in the Senate in particular, we are not going to save the planet until we figure out our own democracy. You know, the climate change that really needs to happen is probably the climate in the Oregon State Senate, because we had the votes in that particular at that particular time until the Republicans walked out. And I think it's going to really be either changing the quorum requirements needed to be changed, or get some, either if you don't do your job, which the Republicans didn't do, to try to figure out how we either make them stay or appoint someone else. There's got to be there's a fundamental problem that is happening with it, and they're going to keep walking out if we don't figure out how to fix that. I don't think the answer is not doing something about cap and trade. That is not acceptable. And climate change is going to continue to affect us in ways that we do not know. And if this pandemic has taught us anything, is that we can work together towards a common goal, and we can face a really terrible thing and get through it as a community.
Well, certainly, if this is my opportunity to speak, is that okay?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. We can't entirely blame this on the Republican walkout. Frankly, we had a state senator, Monis Anderson, a Democrat, who really was the critical missing vote towards the end of the long session. One of the reasons why I'm running for the state senate is I wanted to see more of these progressive bills that are coming out of the House, most notably cap and trade, actually can pass out of the state senate as well. I agree that there are some fundamental climate changes that need to occur inside the state senate as well. A couple of things seem at least initially cosmetic, but I think they're actually important. As a state senator, I would come over to the House side and meet with House members as often as they would come over to my side of the building. And surprisingly, very few state senators spend much time on the House side of the building, which I think is odd and perplexing and not particularly good politics. And and I think that yes, we absolutely need to get the cap and trade bill passed. And there's actually even kind of an interesting a convergence between the issues of COVID-19 and I think other respiratory diseases that are going to be coming our way over time. I think this is one of a number of waves of respiratory viruses that have hit the world. We're going to see more of them, and interestingly enough, places that are impacted by pollution, by greenhouse gases and particulate matter are also areas that have been harder hit with respect to respiratory diseases, including some of the virus ones like COVID-19.
I just want to say that the short session wasn't about votes. We had the votes. It was about the Republicans walking out. So there was going to be a cap and trade in that short session, and the Republicans walked out. So until we figure out that piece of it, we're not going to be able to figure out a cap and trade bill. But we have got to not give away the farm in trying to get this bill done in order to keep luring back Republicans to make them do their jobs. And they've failed to do their jobs. I get the sort of political stunt of walking out. I mean, it's been done before. The Democrats have done it before. I get the political stunt piece of this. The problem with the Republicans is that they wanted to say that they weren't being listened to. They absolutely were, and things changed in that cap and trade bill, and they left anyway. They left anyway. And that failure is the problem. Now, the changing that, I think, really is changing. It's about changing the leadership and the culture in the Senate. And that is something that is really important to me. I will just point out that the Senate's makeup is I don't think it's the issue, but I think it's when you're talking about a culture change, I think it's important to understand that I would be younger than 80% of the sitting senators, one of only a third women and the first openly gay state senator. And I think that those choices, that is really important. And it's important to get more diverse voices being heard in the Senate in particular, in order for us to move that body forward in a meaningful way.
Great, thank you. Actually, I'd like to move on to the next question, and Dick, actually, you'd be first on this. Oregon's educational system has been known for years for having a low graduation rate and high chronic absenteeism. It's had limited success in closing the achievement gap between historically underserved students and white students. Recognizing that education funding is in peril from the pandemic, what other suggestions or ideas do you have to help close the achievement gap and improve the prospects of Oregon students as a whole?
Well, again, it goes back to funding. I think we know the things that actually would work on the education side. They include being able to provide more robust after-school programming. They include being able to provide a wider range of classes and programming, technical training, being able to provide a range of programs that keep people interested in staying in school, and that are also culturally sensitive. It's interesting, as we've learned more over the decades about what actually works on the education side of things. It isn't always intuitive. It can be sometimes counterintuitive. Who knew, perhaps years ago, that things that to some people's minds seemed like a frill, like music, is actually an incredibly powerful way, when you provide music programming, an incredibly powerful way to develop math and spatial thinking skills. That is actually one of the most powerful ways, to push people's achievements, especially in the area of math and science and spatial thinking. Who would have known? We need to provide a range of programming. We need to be able to provide after-school programming as well, summer school programming. It's all a question of, it isn't so much that we don't know what we need to do, it's that we haven't had the funding to do the things that we know are proven based on sound academic background and studies would work to really lower those disparities between racial groups and ethnic groups, and to see the state do better on the education side of things.
Well, I would say that there were a lot of music teachers who knew that it taught math. I mean, we do know what works.
Yes. Yeah.
But I think there's a few things. I've been in education for a long time, decades, and one of the things that we have to do, and I think we were going to start to do this, and hopefully we're still going to do this, is make sure that our youngest, when they're really formidable years, make sure that we are opening up really good either pre-K or preschools for our youngest learners. We know that helps as they move through the system. The second thing that we know is that this pandemic, of course, didn't create the cracks in our system, and it certainly is not going to help with regard to our education system. Poor children without access to the internet have fallen more and more and more behind. We need to make sure that we're able to have technology keep up. There's a huge movement in education called reverse classrooms, where the classroom portion, the lecture portion of it, is done at home, and then children come into the classroom and actually do what we would consider sort of homework, in order to, that's where kids get caught, right? They get caught when they're trying to understand what they heard in a lecture, and we're sort of doing it the reverse way. So there's other really things that can be done, that if we get our technology caught up, that we can do. The other thing is that we need to understand that kids have different interests, and there are some wonderful programs either through the Portland Community Colleges or through the trades, who have great educational programs if you get in there and become an apprentice, that we should be leveraging it in a way that we're not. You could get kids to stay in school if you showed them that there was a path for them to be able to actually get a good job and earn a good living. And I think those apprenticeship programs are an excellent way to do that. So, and then I would just say that we're not going to fix our kids' schools until we really dig into what's going on in the home. There are really profound things that happen within the home that affect our children in their education in an unbelievably profound way. And if we are able to get safety nets in place, if we're able to get better mental health in place for both children and their parents, and we're going to address domestic violence and drug abuse, you are going to see an increase in kids graduating from high schools.
Yeah, I would add to that in terms of my own life experience. I was an immigrant coming to this country at 4.5 from the Netherlands. You know, some of these concepts go really way back in time. I mean, a really robust pre-K program has been kind of a mainstay in Western Europe for many decades. I actually had the benefit of being in what they call the kleuterschool, which was programming that was provided to kids starting at 3.5 all the way up to 5 years old before they started kindergarten. And I'm convinced that was having had that kind of education before kindergarten helped me make that transition when I was sort of hurled into a new environment with a different language at 4.5 and was thrown into kindergarten just a few months later after arriving. So some of these concepts really go way back in time, so it's a question of funding, and it's a question of doing things we know work, and we have learned over time we have no excuses not to fund some of these programs.
Great. My last question, Kate, I think you go first on this one, and that's how independent would you be of your party? You know, can you give us any examples of just how you have shown your independence or political courage to do what you think is right?
Yeah, absolutely. So I am obviously running as a Democrat, but I am going there to represent many people and represent this district. I was fortunate enough to be endorsed by over 30 organizational endorsements, which run the gamut of the run the gamut from environmental and labor and so on. And so I get that there is a broad swath of people who are endorsing me and feel like I'm the right candidate. It is really important, however, that you act independently, and I've done that. That's kind of what I have done. As a prosecuting attorney, obviously you act independently, make very difficult choices in the face of sometimes lots of opposition. I made very difficult choices when I was prosecuting child abuse and domestic violence cases. I made very difficult choices as an adjudicator on the Psychiatric Security Review Board. I make very difficult choices when we're talking about what's happening with the homeless as the chair of the Transitions Projects. So I think the question behind that question is do I have a backbone and will I stand up for what is right? And I think the answer is absolutely. I've done it. That is how I've done my career. I have given voice to people who don't have the power, and I will continue to do so.
And are there any decisions in the past couple years that the legislature has taken, that the Democratic Party, or I should say Democratic legislators have taken that you would have disagreed with?
Is this question directed to Kate?
It's still yes, sorry.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's interesting because I think that the decisions that I disagree with is their failure in leadership in getting some of these bills passed. I mean, I was spurred to do this because of the failure of them to pass in 2019 cap and trade bill. So I certainly think that is something that we cannot do. I think that there have been a number of bills that the Democratic Party has given too much away on, that they have not lived up to their progressive values. And I'm thinking in terms of on bills in the enterprise zones. I think that we need to really relook at that bill with regard to the enterprise zones and making sure that we could close that loophole with prevailing wage. So that was a failure to act on that in the Senate. So I think that there are bills that they haven't taken far enough, or that have never gotten even hearings or out of committee, that were not living up to the progressive values that I think this Democratic Party needs.
And Dick, the question is about independence and whether you would act independently of your party. Just are there examples showing how you're willing to, follow your principles despite incredible opposition?
Yeah, at the state level, I'm not prepared to support Peter Courtney as the next president of the state Senate. I think we need new leadership of the state Senate. I would not vote for him for Senate president. And I feel that way on for a couple of different reasons. One of them is just the whole presentation that he makes, long rambling discourse. I've seen it at the annual business summit in Portland in early December. He loses the audience very quickly. I think we need someone who can speak more concisely and is more contemporary in his views and presentation. Number two, in terms of an example, as a local legislator, as a county commissioner, I faced tremendous opposition on a project that I pushed very hard for. I wanted to see the county dedicate pieces of land left over from road projects as a starting point for affordable housing. One of the projects was at Southwest Bainey and 170th. The county wanted to provide a piece of land to Luchtdorf Company to build duplexes to house homeless people who had mental health issues. I got over 2,000 emails in opposition to that. There was a great deal of stigma towards people who have mental health issues. And I attended several town halls, one at the Mountain View Middle School, where I was absolutely screamed at by probably close to 800 people. But I felt it was absolutely the right thing to do. And I worked with my colleagues. They expected me to take the brunt of what happened because it wasn't my district, in District 1, Beaverton Low area. But I feel very positive that was the right decision to do, even though there was tremendous, like I said, I got over 2,000 emails, a lot of it very hateful.
Laura, do you have any other questions?
No, I think I'm good. Thank you so much for all the time you've given us.
Thanks, Laura.
I think we're all set. Would you like to do a closing statement? Usually, we leave it up. We usually don't have actually very much time, but it's nice with two candidates, we're able to kind of go in depth a bit. If you like, Kate, do you want to give any closing thoughts or just anything?
Yeah, I'm just happy. Well, first of all, thank you. Thank you so much for having Dick and I here. I think that it is really important that we have choice and that the voters have choice and that you're bringing that to them. And I think that that is important. I would just say that I really do believe that my career, I have really demonstrated this sort of fighting to equalize the imbalance of power. And that is something that I will bring to the Oregon State Senate. My core motivation is that I'm a doer. I get things done. I didn't just want to be a senator. I want to go do the job of a senator. And I think that's really an important distinction. I'm ready to do the hard work, and it's going to take a lot of hard work. I fundamentally believe that government can do good. And in this moment in time, we are all reliant on our government making sure that they do good. And that's going to take some hard choices. That's going to take some work, and it's going to take somebody really, really digging in and making sure that we're paying attention to the details, because the details are where it all happens and the details matter. So I just want to thank you. I just believe I'm the right candidate for this moment in time, and I really thank you for the opportunity.
Great, thank you. And Dick, any closing thoughts from you?
Yeah, I think that this district is looking needs someone with a proven track record who's gotten things done as a local legislator, as someone who really knows and understands the district really well, who has been working in the Beaverton area and Eastern Washington County for 20 years, with a proven track record to get things done as far as being able to leverage limited dollars into getting a lot of green space acquisitions. I passed and I led on to the first drug take-back ordinance in the state of Oregon, which directly led to a statewide drug take-back bill. I have worked closely, I have proven track record of working with colleagues in a body, in a public agency body. They know that my word is good. That I say what that I do what I had said I was going to do. Work closely with many constituent groups, help make the Aloha Library a possibility, really helped be a real troubleshooter to turn around a number of nonprofit agencies that do a lot of work that's an adjunct to the Washington County's own work in health and human services. So I have a proven track record of actually doing things, really understand the district really well, have worked with the chambers, have worked with the school districts, worked with the Tualatin Hills Park District, have done some effective lobbying at the state level, both with respect to a drug take-back law, Washington County working in conjunction with legislators there to make that state law possible, because once a large jurisdiction actually passed a drug take-back bill, it became increasingly less tenable for pharma to support a uniform drug take-back bill. Worked on a couple of bike issues, effectively lobbying as a county commissioner. So I have a proven track record of doing things and a history of integrity and a deep knowledge of the district. And I think it's really important that someone who really has worked here for a long time and understands this area represents this district, which, as I said, is overwhelmingly a Washington County district. And much of that district is actually in my county commission district. So I will have a good running start representing the people in Senate District 14.
Well, thank you very much for your time and being with us today. This was a great conversation. We anticipate running our endorsements in the legislative races a week from Wednesday. But if you have any questions, feel free to contact me and I'll follow up with any leftover questions that we might have. So thanks again.
Thank you.
Thank you both.